This, let us head to the bills that are before us today. We're going to examine 5 bills. S-2205, the Tribal Healing to Wellness Courts Act of 2015. S-2421, a bill to provide for the conveyance of certain property to the Tanana Tribal Council and to the Bristol Bay Area Health Corporation and for other purposes. The Dine College Act of 2016, which is S-2564. S-2643, the Pueblo de Cochiti Self-Governance Act, as well as Bill 2717, the Dam Repairs and Improvements for Tribes Act of 2016. Now, all of these bills address specific concerns for American Indian and Alaskan Native communities. I will turn to the bill sponsors for statements on these bills in a moment. On October 22nd, Senator Tester and Franken introduced S-2205, the Tribal Healing to Wellness Courts Act of 2015. This bill would authorize grants for tribal healing to wellness courts to reduce recidivism among tribal members. On October 17th of 2015, Senators Murkowski and Sullivan introduced 2421. This bill would direct the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services to convey certain properties to the Tanana Tribal Council and the Bristol Bay Area Health Corporation. Both properties described in S-2421 will continue to be used to improve health care services in their respective tribal communities. On February 23rd of 2016, Senator Flake introduced 2564 along with Senators Heinrich, McCain, and Udall. This bill would authorize certain grants for capital improvements for the Dine College located on the Navajo Reservation. On March 7th, Senator Udall introduced 2643, the Pueblo de Cochiti Self-Governance Act. This bill so amends the previous Cochiti Wetfields Settlement Agreement to authorize the transfer, the operation, and the maintenance responsibilities for the Cochiti Dam drainage system from the federal government to the Pueblo. And then on March 17th, Senator McCain and I introduced S-2717, the Dam Repairs and Improvements for Tribes Act of 2016, also known as the DRIFT Act. This important piece of legislation would address the safety of dams and flood prevention needs across Indian country. According to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, there are 137 high-hazard dams in 42 reservations and over 700 low-hazard dams across the country. The United States has a trust obligation to maintain and operate these dams and prevent what could be a future dam failure. Now, most of the high-hazard dams are in the western United States, including 2 high-hazard dams on the Wind River Reservation in my home state of Wyoming, the Cochiti and the Ray Lake dams. On average, these BIA dams are 70 to 80 years old. According to BIA officials, these dams have an estimated maintenance backlog of over $500 million. That's $500 million in deferred maintenance needs. Current funding is not keeping up with the maintenance needs of these dams. The DRIFT Act would require the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs in consultation with the Secretary of the Army to address the maintenance backlog of BIA dams by creating a high-hazard Indian Dam Safety Deferred Maintenance Fund and a low-hazard Indian Dam Safety Deferred Maintenance Fund. The high-hazard fund would receive $22,750,000 each year for fiscal years 2017 to 2037. The low-hazard fund would receive $10 million for the same time period. Neglecting the deferred maintenance needs of these low-hazard dams will result likely in them becoming high-hazard dams in the near future. So the DRIFT Act establishes funding priorities based on criteria such as threats to public safety, natural and cultural resources, and economic concerns. The legislation also seeks to make other important flood prevention and dam safety policy reforms for both the BIA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The DRIFT Act is also intended to address additional improvements and safety concerns, establishing a 4-year pilot program for a BIA flood mitigation program for tribes, establishing a Tribal Safety of Dams Committee within the Department of Interior to make recommendations to Congress for modernizing the Indian Dam Safety Act, requiring tribes regularly report their dam inventory to BIA, requiring the BIA to report annually on the safety status of the dams to Congress, and authorizing reforms to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Tribal Partnership Program for tribal cost share requirements for feasibility studies, among other provisions. The threat to public safety in and around Indian country is a serious concern. It's critical that we make these necessary changes to ensure that tribes and surrounding communities are protected. We need to move this legislation as expeditiously as possible, get it signed into law.